For those of you who don't know me, my name's Debbie Abrahams. I'm the MP for Oldham East and Saddleworth, but I'm also the co-chair of the APPG for compassionate politics. So welcome to you all. I'm also joined by a fantastic panel minus one. We're not too sure if Puttnam has already been admitted to this group, who's online or not. But at the moment, in the room with me, which is just until Jan is to be meeting in face, is Gina Miller, who is the director with Matt Hawkins sitting behind me here for the Compassion in Politics group. And Gina Miller, who's also, can I read out with actually, oh no, yes. Yeah, I have to. So Gina is a business owner. Many people remember Gina back in the Brexit days in terms of the very principled stand that she took, taking the state for exiting the European Union support in relation to this. So my first chance to meet you. Congratulations in what you did there. But Gina also founded the True and Fair Parties, and hopefully you'll be able to tell us a little bit about that in your introduction, Gina. But for those of you who don't know anything about the APPG, what we're trying to do with this group is to shift the culture in politics. We know we have a very adversarial political system, and that often doesn't bring out the best in us, both as people, but also in terms of our politics and within that our politics. So what we're trying to do is to develop a more cooperative and collaborative culture in politics, which helps us to identify common areas of work where we can develop good quality policy which benefits all of our constituents, the country as a whole. But also if we can't agree, then to do it in a respectful way. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and what that means in practice as we go forward. But I'm conscious we're a little bit late in starting, so I'm not going to hold up proceedings. And I want to really hand over to the panel before we open it up to questions from me, but also from the floor as well. So do we have, first of all, can I see if we can identify David Puttnam? Are you there, David? Yes, we have David. That's fantastic. David, can I ask you to make your opening remarks? You've got about 5 minutes. I'm going to be a bit tighter on the time, if that's all right. 5 minutes is for your introduction in terms of why we need to develop a more honest-based approach in politics. You guys think that we are still having some technical issues?
He's on mute.
He's on mute. Okay. Are you able to unmute yourself, David, or does that need for us to do it essentially?
How's that? Can you hear me now again?
Fantastic! Yay!
Oh, I hate this system. Okay, so I'll be really quite quick. June 2020, I delivered a report, the House of Lords report, which was unanimous. I must make that point. So it was all parties, and it was utterly unanimous, where we made very, very precise recommendation as to the importance of regulating political digital advertising, the way in which you could do it. And working really with Ray and Alex, we proved that you can do it. And this was kind of rubbished by the government. In fact, I was trying to think of a nicer word, but it wasn't. It was rubbish. Unfortunately, I've got to say, whilst the Tories were extraordinarily uncooperative with our committee, Labour weren't that much better. Lib Dems were pretty good, in that the digital teams from both major parties seemed to think that they required or wanted to retain what they called an edge. Now, their edge was, don't get too fussy about the messages we do or the claims we make, because it's only digital. I mean, I'm watching Gina carefully here, which is kind of madness, absolute madness. Now, interestingly, I get a newsletter every day from Heather Cox Richardson, who's an American. And in the newsletter this morning, she points out that an Israeli tech firm called Cyber has found that in the US, there have been fake accounts, I mean thousands of fake accounts created, claiming that Biden is this, Biden is that, by that, all fake accounts, all created by the Republican Party. So the notion that digital is of marginal influence or a marginal issue when it comes to political advertising is frankly, there is bonkers. What I'm asking for, more than asking for, I'm kind of really pushing for, because 87%, according to YouGov, of the public want it, is that we bring regulation of digital political advertising into the Digital Harms Bill as quickly as possible and keep it there, using the formula, because it's a very uncontentious formula that we created in the June 2020 committee. There is no excuse not to do it. And frankly, if Keir Starmer were listening to this, the message is simple. The Tories are seeking a license to lie. That's it. Simple as that. But the Tory digital team don't want to be regulated because they want to be able to lie. And as we all know, I worked for years with the Advertising Standards Association. You cannot put a bus sign today that says Purcell washes whiter. It's illegal, right? It'll be taken down. If you can't say Purcell washes whiter, why on earth should be able to make false claims at the time of an election on behalf of any political party? So I'm hoping that Labour will sign up with the Lib Dems, with the Greens, to a clear case for regulation of all political advertising, including digital, or rather to include digital in the same framework as the rest of political advertising. It's inexcusable we don't, but it just needs someone to start banging some heads together, frankly, at your end. I could bang on, and I really won't, because I know it's my fault that we're running late.
Thank you, David. Thanks very much. Actually, I was on the online safety bill pre-legislative scrutiny committee, and that was certainly one of the things that we raised, and certainly we know it's done successfully in New Zealand, and in the same way that we need parity in terms of our online safety regulation with our mainstream media, this extends to that as well. So I totally agree, and I certainly am.
One last thing I say in terms of this particular, just one last thing in terms of this particular APPG. If we're going to rebuild trust, and that, remember that committee I chaired was all about trust. If we're going to rebuild trust, this is an essential plank to doing that. And if we decide not to do that, what you're actually saying to the electorate, that you can't trust us, and that we are asking for the means by which to be untrustworthy. So this license to lie is what I'd like here to be hammering home in the front bench.
Thank you. I will, as I say, I can't leave it to Gina now, but thank you very much for the moment.
Thank you so much for inviting me today. David alluded that he wanted to buy up this. It's not the medium alone, it's the message and the medium that matter. And I think this whole idea that somehow digital can operate as a cowboy landscape is just bonkers. I mean, it's financial services and political advertising or the political sphere need to be regulated as well as every other sector, and they're both excluded from the online safety bill, which makes no sense whatsoever. But the idea that the pushback I get, and I've always gotten, is politics is different. Sorry, politics is not different. Politics should be setting the standard. It's not different. It's not outside of any other sphere of governance or transparency or morality or decency. It's not somewhere that operates differently. But in the whole sphere of this APPG and the context of honesty, the reason I set up the True and Fair Party is that I think all of these are symptoms of something much more fundamental. And to me, the fundamental thing that's broken is our machinery of government. It's outdated. It's based on 1884 on a book that was basically written by a clerk. So we've got a machinery that was built in the 18th century, operating in 21st century politics. So you can do as many plasters over, you can do as many short-term fixes and right or left fixes, but you're still avoiding the fundamental problem. The machine is out of date. If we don't regulate and update our machinery of government, you're not going to fix the culture, not going to attract better people, because you're attracting people who actually know how to operate that outdated machinery. They don't have the skills to operate the modern day machinery of government, which is transparent, which is accountable, which is open to scrutiny, which is transparent. So you're not getting the right people, you're not getting the right culture, and inevitably output of that machinery is not fit for purpose. The policy making element that's coming out from updated machinery is ideological, it's narrow-minded, it's led by goals, it's not about leadership, it's not about long-term thinking. We really do not have, it's that basic. We literally haven't got a machinery of government that's fit for purpose. And so the True and Fair Party, our remit, if you like, our one banging on the table, as David called it, is we have to update the machinery. We have to have rules, regulations, no more good chap model of government. Let's just not hope naively that there's always going to be a good chap in the room, good chap, male or female. You know, that is so naive. We're supposed to be the mother of all parliaments, and yet mother is so sick. We need to get her better.
Thank you, Gina. That's absolutely fantastic. And I agree with you. Absolutely, we have an outdated system. I will talk later about my elected representatives codes of conduct bill, because we, you know, there are moves afoot about how we do this, but I think your general analysis in terms of the issues with our system are absolutely spot on. I'm going to hand over now to Jennifer. So lovely to see you. It's been a few months since we've caught up. Lovely to see you again. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thanks so much. I agree with everything that's been said. Just picking up on Gina's point about having a sick mother. You know, this sick mother of all parliaments has actually had two much more functional children. If we look at Scotland and we look at Wales, they have got an updated machinery and their parliaments work very differently as a result. So this is not rocket science. This is fixable. We're in the House of Commons at the moment. It is really a wonderful museum piece, which is what it should be. It's a museum piece to a time when parliamentarians carried swords and had to be kept apart from each other. And it's set up as a place of tribal warfare. And in a place of tribal warfare, you cannot let the other side win. And truth evaporates out of the window because winning becomes all. And there are often very good reasons for wanting to win. We want to win because we have an agenda and we think that agenda is going to make the world a better place, or we have an ideology that we feel passionate about. But the moment one lets truth slip out of the picture, then one loses all the good that can come of those policies. And we set up Compassion in Politics because we really felt that the moral anchor had completely disappeared, that politics had descended into something that lacked value. And honesty is the most important value. We talk to the public, we do frequent polling of the public on their attitudes. Our polling with opinion says that 7 in 10 people say they don't trust anything politicians say. A similar proportion don't trust what the parties themselves say. And when asked to rank values, honesty comes at the top of the list of values that the public want to see in politics. And when asked what's wrong with political culture in the UK, not surprisingly, top of the list is dishonesty. And so my background is I was a lawyer. And one of the things that we find continually in Compassion in Politics is that the values that the rest of us live by are not the values that are expected of politicians. There is somehow this huge gulf. And politicians, the ones at this table, and the many good politicians in Parliament, when I say the word politician, I don't mean to tar everyone with the same brush. But nevertheless, the behaviour that is expected of us is not the behaviour that is demanded of politicians. And rather than leading from the top, they're dragging behind at the bottom. So my background is as a lawyer, and when I was in bar school, I learned about the Misrepresentation of Goods Act, which is a very simple piece of legislation which governs business. It simply says you can't deliberately make a false misrepresentation to get people to buy your goods. And we don't understand why politics is any different. So we decided to test that with the public. We drafted a law which would apply the same principle to political statements as applies to contracts and misrepresentations. And we set up a petition. We got 200,000 members of the public signing that petition pretty quickly. That's double the number that's needed to have a debate in the Commons. We also did polling and found that 3/4 of the public support the implementation of that law, 73%. And to David's point, 72% would like to see the advertising rules brought into line for political advertising as well. So the public are in no doubt. So that bill that we drafted was then taken up. It had cross-party support. We always work on a cross-party basis. It was taken into the House by Cymru, who had one private member's bill place. They took it in, and of course it's not going to become legislation, but it sits there. It sits there, and it is waiting for a political party to say that enough is enough, and we're going to govern ourselves by the same rules that everyone else is governed by. The two arguments that you use against introducing the law are one, that it would restrict parliamentary sovereignty, right? Sovereignty to lie. We're not saying that you can't implement the policies that you want to implement. We're just saying you can't do it by lying. I mean, that's really not interfering with any kind of sovereignty. And the other thing is, we can't drag courts into the messy business of deciding political issues. They're not political issues. The matters of fact. That is what courts do on a daily basis. They decide factual matters. They're able to distinguish between a puff and a rhetorical flourish and a deliberate misrepresentation. Courts are incredibly experienced about this. So that bill sits there waiting to be picked up, and in a minute we'll hear about another piece of legislation which we've been working with Debbie on, which hopefully will be picked up. And I just want to zoom out a bit and just say a few words about why this matters so much. It matters so much because if people disengage from politics, we have no democracy. And that is a very, very dangerous position to be in. And I remember talking to one parliamentarian at the time of Brexit who told me of a colleague who felt unable to say the truth on the floor of the House because of what might happen to her family. This is Great Britain. We do not have a democracy where people cannot say their truth with impunity, and where politicians are deliberately lying to serve their own ends. So thank you so much for asking me to speak, and hopefully together we can change this pilot later.
Thank you. Can I say one thing that our research on this about disengagement? I think this is such an important point. Is that if the demos, if people don't trust politics and the institutions we have, we really don't have a democracy. And our polls consistently show, I mean, we did last August, and remember in the mid-century one now, which is terrifying because the one time that's going up, the percentage going up is the one who say they don't trust, don't design, that number, the question we're asking is, if there was an election next month, would you vote? And it's terrifying because it looks as though we haven't got the final polls yet. But just this year, our first run here of the data, it looks as it's over 60%. That's extraordinary. That's extraordinarily high. We've never seen anything like this before. This is a literally at the heart of our democracy. If people are saying they don't want to engage because they don't trust.
Well, as the only elected politician in the room, I feel a little bit. First of all, I absolutely agree with the analysis in terms of the issues that exist. I think there's. I want to talk a little bit, if I may, about the bill that I introduced in the beginning of January, because there are, and I think this is what perhaps people don't appreciate. There are quite a plethora of regulatory frameworks for politicians, both as ministers and as members of Parliament, but they're not adequate enough. Everybody hopefully knows that we are meant to abide by the Nadel principles, part of the MP's code of conduct. What you may not know is that the parliamentary thinking on standards, again, not everybody knows that there is a commissioner who does take MPs to task when there are complaints about breaches of the code. But they are the Nadel principles, the 7 Nadel principles include Exactly. So you'd think that that should be that perfect framework. But the Parliamentary Commission on Standards is expressly prohibited from investigating breaches in any of the known principles, which seems absolutely nonsense, doesn't it? Yeah. So my bill looks at a number of different areas. First of all, in terms of the so-called Independent Commission on Ministerial Standards. Again, not independent at all. We know, for example, in the recent case of Nadel it required the Prime Minister to authorise the Commissioner to actually investigate Zahawi in relation to his breaches. So my proposal is that this position would be fully independent, Commissioner on Ministerial Standards, and it would have a statutory office, so it can't be interfered by us politicians. The second thing was in terms of making the Parliamentary Commission on Standards a fully independent office. So again, the current position is actually accountable to the Committee on Standards and Privileges, which is consists of MPs, but also Labour people as well. So and that's not always known. So I often hear, well, why aren't ordinary people involved? Well, they are, but there are two other groups as well that contribute to standards in Parliament. There's the Commission on Standards in Public Life. David may know Lord Evans, and Lord Evans is the current chair of that, but it consists of lay people and parliamentarians as well. And then finally, there is another committee whose name I cannot remember. But there is a third group as well. So we've got, as I say, a plethora of these different regulatory groups that are involved. So those are the first two: Independent Commissioner on Ministerial Standards, Independent Commissioner on Parliamentary Standards, and that it would include the Nolan principles, that they would be responsible for the Nolan principles. So that there are serious and serial breaches, how to define that, and my bill that's coming up for second readings at the end of the month would prescribe that. The third element is most people's understanding of what elected representatives are about is at a local level. So if you have a good or a not so good councillor, you will get your impression of what elected politics is about through these people. Currently, there is only, through the 2011 Localism Act, a requirement to have a code of conduct for councillors. That, as again Lord Evans's group has shown, is very variable. It can be really poor, could be really good, and again, the enforcement is not reflected in that. So should be a national, third bit of my bill, a national standard of in terms of councillor code of conduct, and it should be a statutory. It should be monitored statutorily as well. And finally, I think this is the point that both Gina and Jennifer made. There needs to be an ethics commission which drags our parliamentary and political system into the 21st century, that looks at all the gaps that exist. My bill couldn't cover everything because private members' bills aren't meant to cover anything, but it does need a comprehensive look about how we make sure the issues that we know are important to the public, they're actually addressed. Honesty is one really important aspect, but there's far more. We've discussed this as, you know, as compassionate politics people. How do we make sure, for example, we have a general election every 4 or 5 years? How do we make sure in between time that we are checking back with people, that they are actually actively engaged and know that what we're doing is meeting their needs? So how we then introduce things like citizens' assemblies, which I'm absolutely passionate about. The climate assembly that was undertaken, David Attenborough took part back in 2019-20, is absolute excellent example of how we can have compassionate policy and politics. People from all walks of life from across the country coming together, working with people who have expert knowledge on the area and developing recommendations about how a policy could be made better in a collaborative way. So this I absolutely think is at the heart of how we make sure that people don't feel that they are, once every 5 years, that's it. I'm giving you my political power, but I'm not really sure that I'm going to trust you in terms of how I'm going to use it. Is it part of that sort of process? But I'm going to hand over, I'm conscious of time. What do you all think of those sort of ideas? We've got Jennifer's through Liz, we've got the elected representative codes of conduct. What David said about the online safety bill, which again I absolutely agree.
What we're calling for is actually all these things to put into legislation, because I think we have to. So we're talking about ethics, health and well-being, workplace, because we don't have a health and workplace bill either in the UK. So when you look at the torture of the remit in Parliament, so and if you look at other countries, so the ethics that's in the US, we need to bring updated. I think the time has gone by, has passed now, of codes and committees. I think it's by legislation now.
Absolutely, which is
which is aligned with what you're saying.
Nobody's above the law.
Well, I mean, look, in my cases, I've heard this argument so many times that court should not be stepping on the territory, not park their tanks. It's the term on the political landscape. Well, actually, they're there. The separation of the institutions are there for a reason, and that nobody is above the law. This idea that politicians have crown immunity or are exempt from law actually enables them to behave in a certain way. And I think that we have the tools are there when it comes to the separation of power. So it is a bogus argument from politicians that they shouldn't have the courts. They are part of our constitutional institution to do.
What would you say as the lawyer? Something that was going back to me when I was saying about putting the ministerial code on the statute. It is non-allowed, by the way, already. And doing that here. It was thrown back to me that we've had 400 years of it being this way, and there were issues, and you're the lawyer, as I said, justifiable issues associated with that. What would you say as a lawyer in response to that?
All these things are justiciable. So that's just an excuse. And this argument that history requires that we carry on behaving as if we were in another time, we wouldn't be alive. I wouldn't be alive today as a mother if we wouldn't have had healthcare. I mean, it's
We wouldn't be sitting here, the three of us.
hybrid fashion way of bringing democracy out of, out to reach those who can't make their way here. So it's not even a starter. And, I had this very informing moment with the former Secretary of Health, has now hit the headlines yet again, where I was talking to her about our polling, which shows that the public are completely disillusioned with Prime Minister's questions. They think it's ridiculous. After watching it, their trust in politicians goes down. And his argument was, well, how are we meant to test an idea if we can't take it to the floor of the House? And he was very passionate about this. And this goes back to that idea that this is how we test ideas. And I said, well, in that case, why doesn't every major global corporation build a debating chamber? And we are so out of date. And
Okay.
Debbie, one thing you haven't mentioned is that, and to me, it's a litmus test. Instead of taking the opportunity to strengthen the Electoral Commission, in fact, it's been slowly dismantled. We got really excellent evidence from the Electoral Commission, and basically what we got back was, they're interfering in sovereign powers of Parliament. What are they there? They're there to ensure that elections are free and fair. Yeah. They've actually been diminished, not strengthened.
So totally agree with you around that, David. I absolutely agree with you. Yeah.
Next, there's a question for you there. What are the chances of your bill passing?
Well, dear people, I'd be really, really grateful if you could contact your MP and let them know that second reading is going to be on the 24th of March. And if they could, I have written to both the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, the Cabinet Secretary, to try and get support. I'm quite happy for this to be taken over by the government. I'm not being partisan about this. I just think this is the right thing for all the reasons that have been raised here, that this is the right thing for us to do. It's about improving our politics so that we can serve the people that we represent. But I haven't yet had a response. That goes back to, I wrote to them in the middle of January. I have had no response so far. So please let your friends and family know and get them in contact with their MPs, so there can be a little of upward pressure so that the government take this on. I do personally think there was a good paper that came out from Gordon Brown back in December, yes, which was talking about some of these issues. So and it also gets back to what you were saying, David, about the party looking at some of the issues that we face in our system. So I think we are definitely moving in the right direction, and I would be confident that this will be taken up. Again, not being partisan, but I think we should be doing it quicker. You know, we've got another 18 months. We can't have, as Gina has said, you know, an attrition of, well, it'd be about 20% in the last election in terms of turnout, wouldn't it? If it was so low. So
well, I had quite luck. I had lunch with Gordon Brown last summer, and he promised me, and I think he did, that he'd take it up with Morgan McSweeney. I was then told he had, but I've heard not another word since.
Right, I will pursue that on your behalf there, David. I'll get back to you, because it's absolutely in all of our interest to have a strong and healthy political system and democracy. So
I mean, I was going to add two things. One was that it's also, if we concentrate on the government of the day, but there's actually also a healthy democracy requires a healthy opposition as well. So this is not actually just about the government in the day. It's actually about the entire system. Yeah. So we mustn't just fixate on the behaviour of a particular government. It's actually irrespective of your political view. This is about much wider the operation of the machinery of the government being fit for purpose. But the other bit, I think we forget that it's also part of the solution of how do we increase honesty and trust, because I think those two things go hand in hand. It's about proportional representation as well. I think that is the other bit that's missing from this, is that, you know, we can correct, if you like, or update the machinery of government, but the participants have to feel that their vote is represented as well. Which is why I think those, you know, we must not forget that's part of improving democracy as well, into reforming our electoral system. And I, you know, pull my hair out speaking to cross-party politicians, too many parties, because I just can't think on their horizon, to be honest.
Well, the Labour Party has passed American.
Yeah, but again, they passed it. It's still, I mean, the parliamentary parties. You know, I despair that, because, you know, it actually would improve the public perception and belief in the system participation, because it's, you know, the idea, you know, part of the what we're picking up on why people don't vote is my vote is, yeah, it doesn't make a difference. So that is part of the problem as well.
Yeah, and personally, it's something that I support, but we'll wait and see on that. I can't see.
There's a great question there, Nicola, around cultural change as well as legal. So how do we create leadership models, peer pressure, or other approaches that will encourage honesty, not just be on the hard legal mechanism?
And while we're waiting for the legislation, and the answer is that we all have a responsibility. We all have a responsibility to call it out, to not engage, to not amplify the voices of hate. You know, there's this wonderful more common research that finds that 87% of us globally are not in the extremes, and yet the extremes somehow grab the mic. We have to take the mic back to them and listen to them and not amplify them when they are on something.
That's true. I've just come back from David. That was really the view in terms of what their experience is. Well, very, very few extremists that are getting lost there at the time. So there's thinking about the media. There is a media element, but I totally agree with what you're saying about the leadership role. I think politicians need to recognise that they do have a leadership role, and it is about the behaviour that we should be expected to demonstrate, but hold our
The really interesting question from Nicola that asked about influencing culture. If you look again, politics is not different from any other sector. If you look at how we've increased diversity, culture, whistleblowing, all the processes and procedures and governance and other sectors. In financial services that I've come from and I've lived my life in professional life in, is that we've had, companies have had to behave differently. They've had to put in rules and regulations and procedures. And what that happens now is that people don't want to apply to businesses who don't have a particular cultural mindset. And I would argue the reason why we're not getting more people in politics who perhaps agree with us in this room and our audience watching is because the system, the culture hasn't evolved the way that, they're frightened. You read in the headlines about bullying, about misogyny, about bullying, about the drinking club. Why would people want to apply to a place like that? They're choosing not to. So these things do go hand in hand to get people who perhaps are of a much more civic minded and don't see it as a sixth form, political playing society or a club that they belong to. That a particular culture will attract a particular mindset. So these things do go hand in hand. But I think we have to have some lines in the sand that say enough is enough. And that's what we're really all talking about today, aren't we? Being on the same page and pushing back much more. And I'll just one more thing, which I find really fascinating, is that the term half-truth actually entered the Oxford English Dictionary in 2016. Now, is that a coincidence? I just put it out there that that's actually the first time it entered in it. So it wasn't just what's happening in the UK, it was actually a global movement as well.
Very interesting point. David, as a former parliamentarian, what is your experience of this? How do you think that we should behave in a way that shifts the culture?
It's an interesting question, Debbie. I'm thinking about this. So I was 24 years in the Lords. I would say for the first 15 of them, roughly, so 1997, it was, when people use the word honourable member or whatever, there was a sense of not wishing to be seen by your peers as either being untruthful or it was quite important the way you were perceived. I think in the last decade it hasn't mattered. As long as your front bench felt that you were kind of backing them to the hill, irrespective of what they were saying, that was okay. So I think the whole notion of peer pressure in the broad sense was genuinely important in 1997, and it began to evaporate with, actually, I have to say, the Cameron government. It began to not matter. And I think under Johnson, we reached an absolute nadir where, in fact, I had actually people saying to me, you're naive and you're silly, accusing me actually of being very old-fashioned, and that the modern world required the ability to lie and lie successfully. And I have to say here, the media, in a sense, have been complicit in this. It's very important to say that. I mean, at the moment, I keep reading about this idiot, David Frost, being quoted all the time. David Frost is a clown, and anyone at the Foreign Office who'd worked with him knows he's a clown, and yet I never read it anywhere. As though this man has got some measure of wisdom attached to him. He was a failure at the Foreign Office. He's a total opportunist who latched onto Boris Johnson and somehow has been taken seriously by the media. And the same thing happened with Nadine Dorries. These people are idiots, and yet the media treat them, because they're kind of available, they treat it as if they're sensible politicians.
Let's just think about the international ramifications of this, that we are seen as a bunch of people, some in government, some are not, that are not trustworthy, and what that means in terms of our relationships that we have with foreign powers, in terms of the stability of our economy, all these sort of things. The ramifications are huge, aren't they?
They are huge, and the credibility matters, and being able and the market to have confidence. Confidence and credibility really matter when it comes to our reputation and attracting inward investment. And our inward investment has gone off a cliff. And then not only that, you know, looking at the London stock market, our credibility as a place for listing stocks has also fallen off a cliff. We you know, everyone was worried post-Brexit we'd go to Europe. We always knew we'd go to New York. That's already happening. We've got huge property companies on other companies who are moving. We know that a lot of the car companies are looking to leave, because what I hear going around businesses, as you know, as leader of the True and Fair Party, is that they are worried about not just the next. No business makes a 3 to 5 year plan, and they're not convinced about the next 5 years, 3 to 5 years. And they're saying if they're going to make long-term commitments when it comes to financial commitments about building factories, investing, they're not going to do it in the 3 to 5 years. They don't believe we're a stable country. They're going to leave because they can't see a 10-year plan. That's the thing. You know, as businesses, we are not looking that short term. And so our economy is not going to recover anytime soon because of the lack of forward investment, because we are not seen as a credible, stable political country. And that has really big ramifications.
I was thinking also in terms of you know, the rule of law and the primacy of the rule of law and how, you know, thinking about what's happening with breaches of
Well, we're about breaking international law.
Ukraine. You know, this is, you know, there are huge ramifications about how our behaviour as politicians, elected representatives have for our democracy and that spreading beyond our borders. So the value of it. So again, if I could put on you to lobby your MPs to support my bill, it's a start. It's a start which would really, I think, make a difference.
There's 2 people who've messaged saying that they'd like to actually come on screen and ask a question.
That's absolutely fine.
Well, one question and one comment as well. We'll go to Nicola first. Very bear with us.
Thank you. Can you see me?
Yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to very briefly, because I've been doing work with compassionate leadership in the NHS, and there's so much cross you know, collaboration we could do with understanding. The work I've been doing is around what gets in the way of compassion. If, you know, people assume that something must go terribly wrong, you know, what it gets in the way of compassion in the NHS. And I think there's some huge similarities here, that when you're addressing the problems of toxic behaviour and lying and things, I'm excited by the legislation. I'll be really supporting that approach. But I'm also really interested in how we build a culture where it's normal to be compassionate, calling out inappropriate behaviour, being able to speak up, like you say. There's a lot of work to do, but I just really wanted to highlight the fact that compassion is really misunderstood. Yeah. We think we know what compassion is, and we forget that the reason that people stop being compassionate is actually because of their own emotional reactions on the inside that they're not handling. So somebody mentioned fear. Absolutely right. You know, that's what makes us behave badly. I'm not excusing those behaviours. I'm just saying there's a lot of work we can do to support the culture as well as the legislation. I'd love to have further conversations with you.
Absolutely. Well,
Debbie, could I have one thought on that? I've been reading, I should have done this years ago, I've been reading Simone Weil on the whole issue of rights versus obligations. And she's absolutely nails it, that we have become a rights-obsessed group of people, and the result being that we've parked our obligations. And I think what Nicola's talking about is our human obligations to each other, as opposed to this obsessive notion of what my rights are. And it's very interesting for me as an old man to find myself reading something written in the 50s, and she was absolutely nailed on then, and somehow we missed it.
And Nicola, I completely agree with you. And in fact, Michael West, who's one of the leading champions, works with us. And in fact, I've been invited in to do training with staff, compassionate training with staff by the Palace of Westminster. We just need to get that training rolled out.
Lovely. And the thing that Michael West says, which is so often missed, is that compassionate leadership begins with ourselves. We have to learn self-compassion to be able to be compassionate. And that's the bit that so many of us leapfrog in leadership. We forget the internal process. So, you know, I'm glad you're doing that, but I'm always happy to talk.
Very good point, Nicola. Thank you so much for making that. Did you say there was one more?
There's one more, yeah, I think George is agreeing. With Talia?
Earlier?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I just had a question. I'm a local councillor and I campaigned, I'm part of a party, but I campaigned I beat the Tories with a three-word slogan into a two-word slogan, which was better politics. But I just stood under that banner. But my question is, and it's sort of to Gina as well, is that, you know, and I can see, I get it's a lot more toxic than I thought. It's harder for women, definitely. I do a lot of work around Vogue as well. And if you put yourself in that arena, there's a lot of criticism. I met so many women, particularly that said, oh my goodness, I could never do that. You'd have to be so strong. And it really annoyed me because I thought we shouldn't have to be strong. You should have people there that just care, want to make a difference and are good at problem solving. But we've got that huge problem. But what I struggle with is I can see that you've got a really difficult system in this country, not PR. And it's really hard because most people just, you know, the worst thing people say to me is, oh, you're all the same. They're all the same. And I think there's really good people that want to do it and want to do the right thing in all parties, actually. But it's really hard because everyone's so sick of voting because a lot of the time their votes don't count and they have to vote a particular way. So my question, I see what Gina's doing with the True and Fair Party, and I totally, you know, that's all I got involved because of Boris Johnson, if I'm honest, and I just thought I have to stand. I can't stand in my kitchen anymore. I want to stand up and do something. But it's just about honesty and integrity. But I can see what Gina's doing, but I think, crikey, how does that work? How can we get a system when people's votes just don't count for anything at the moment? And the two main parties, it's not in their interest to change it. So that's what I wanted to say. But how do we get people's trust? And yeah, that was it really.
Can I say on that point, we hear it on the doorstep the whole time. They're all the same. It is sort of the expenses scandal on steroids, literally, and it's up and down the country, from cities to countryside. It doesn't matter where we go. I think God knows how many tours we did last year, trying to listen to people. But the M&S thing was amplified by COVID and by Boris Johnson's behaviour. So I think I look at it different, Talia, which is we have an opportunity. I'm always hopeful. I think these crises have actually created opportunity because as a population, people have not been traditionally in the UK that bothered about politics. I'm not talking about us. I'm talking about the ordinary person in the street. We don't sit in cafes and talk about politics. You know, it's not that sort of country. We've not been that sort of country. But that sentiment has changed post-COVID. And so I'm actually thankful to Boris Johnson for stretching the system, the weak system we have, to its utter limits, because he's exposed all the weaknesses and people are angry now and they're involved. And I think that creates a window of opportunity for the next election. So I do think we have, all of us collectively, going in the same direction, do have an opportunity to create change this time. I'm not saying that that toxic thing will be there forever, but I do think we have a different sentiment within our population. There are more people who are angry, there are more people who do something different. We just need to offer them hope, because the other word, the other that's we're always picking up is broken. People think everything is broken, everywhere around is broken, and that also leads to this mindset that we can't change anything. What's the point? It's so broken. But you know what? We all, one by one, little drops in a bucket, we come together, the stream of consciousness that changes the future. And that's a message I'd say to people. We have to be that stream of consciousness. Our one drops, all of us together. That's how we come.
Thank you. I'm conscious of the time. So are there any final points you want to make, Jennifer? I'll hand over to David.
I think just that it can begin with each of us refusing to go along with it. And one thing, people say that their votes don't count. I'm always sort of in awe of how much deliberation people take over how they're going to vote. When you meet people outside the polling station, you realise this is a solemn moment, that even without proportional representation, it is a very solemn moment exercising one's right to vote. So I hope that everyone will exercise their right.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. David.
I just think unless we get this right, and I think basically Gina's absolutely right, we are marching inexorably towards autocracy. You can wave goodbye to democracy unless we get this right. And we will, my children, my grandchildren will live in a very, very uncomfortable autocracy.
Well, let's be a little bit more hopeful. I am embroiled, obviously, right in the middle of the system and recognise all that is wrong with it. But I am hopeful. I do believe that even if we don't immediately get to PR, and I think again the sort of political power that a PR system provides to members of the public, so that they are vested more into voting. That there are other things we can do, and I've mentioned political assemblies, citizens' assemblies rather, but also let's get some political education of our young people as well. You know, I started a summer school for young people, again on my website, because we haven't got time. There's so much more, so everybody understands their role. You can be political in your neighbourhood. You can start a campaign around a flag tipping cleanup or whatever it is the particular issue. You can be political in that way. It's not just about us here as elected representatives creating rules and laws and so on. There's ways to improve your community, and that's what politics should be about.
Debbie, I've got to say, because I'm not going to come off as pessimist. 20 years ago, exactly 20 years ago, we passed the Communications Bill 2002-3, with Ofcom having an absolute obligation to make digital literacy statutory. It had never happened. 20 years later, we're still arguing about the benefits or otherwise of digital literacy. That's why we're having this discussion today. We don't have a generation of people that understand how important it is.
Fair points, David, and again, in the era of social media, you make it even more strongly. So thank you so much. Can I thank everybody that's come on today, including our guest speakers there, but also specifically to David Puttnam, Jennifer Nadel, and to Gina Miller. So thank you so much, everyone. Oh, and everybody behind the scenes, you can't see, it's Matt Hawkins, and there's George Hugh. Sorry, as well. Thanks so much, everyone, and I hope to see you at another session. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie, very much indeed. Thanks, everybody.
Bye now. Bye.